This is probably the first time in the last 10 years that a sequel to one of my childhood favorite games didn't disappoint me in some fashion. No, in some ways, Kirby Air Riders actually exceeded my expectations. Now, despite my reputation of being sort of a cynical doomer type of guy who hates the modern game industry, I actually always had faith in Masahiro Sakurai. It's obvious that he pours his heart and soul into his games. Even if people have various issues with all of the Smash Bros. Games since Melee, I think Brawl is still one of my favorite childhood games, and no, I never cared that it wasn't competitive. And conceptually, Smash Ultimate is the perfect Super Smash Bros. Game. I really don't think Sakurai has ever truly disappointed. Yes, he plays favorites. You can even tell in Kirby Air Riders that he's not the biggest fan of the Kirby games he didn't work on. But me, I'm not really a huge Kirby fan myself, though I have played like 7 or 8 of the games, believe it or not. Those of you who watch my streams know I'm a little bit of a baby game enjoyer. My game of the year last year was a little indie game where you play as a taxi that nobody cared about. And I've talked about on many occasions that Kirby Air Ride is one of my favorite childhood games. Definitely a bit of a cult classic. Very bare bones. I think most fans of the original game didn't even care about 2 out of 3 of its game modes. Really, it was only renowned for City Trial, which I'll describe what that is in detail a little later. But let's just say it was a basic party game akin to Mario Party or Mario Kart. In fact, in some ways, it's a combination of both of those games. Unfortunately, it was also the type of party game where if you really knew it inside and out, you could absolutely dunk on your friends. Or in my case, my younger brother, because I knew where all of the Hydra and Dragoon parts could potentially spawn, so he never wants to play it with me again. And that's still true to this day. Damn it doesn't matter. Damn it! No! Damn it! But I'm not here to give you a trip down memory lane. We're here to talk about the sequel. Now, unlike some other never-ever type sequel games that have disappointed me in recent years, especially Dragon's Dogma 2, that one still hurts. This game is genuinely good, period. Within its genre, of course. I'm not going to tell anyone to buy a Switch 2 just for one good game. I mean, if you've been watching this channel a long time, you know I hate the modern game industry, obviously, and I want it to burn to the ground. However, this is probably the most fun I've had playing a party game in years. And as long as you realize that this is a party game, this is not a competitive online multiplayer game, even though everything that has online multiplayer is treated as if it's the new Counter-Strike. People can't just, I don't know, play a few casual matches of a game and have a good time anymore. And that includes me, by the way. I'm well aware that I raged at this game several times already. For some of us, it's just in our nature. That said, if you want a party game to just play with your friends on the same couch, which I realize nobody does that anymore, but if you are the type of person who does, this is a perfect game for that. I won't waste too much time in this intro rambling about nothing. Let's just get into the review. Normally I would dive right into the gameplay, but I realize there's a lot of people that still don't even really understand what Kirby Air Riders is, despite the fact that Sakurai got 2 directs dedicated just to this game. To put it simply, like I said in the intro, it's basically a combination of Mario Party and Mario Kart, which honestly to me is just genius. The reason why the first game never took off is because to many it just felt like a more bare bones, less skill-based, overly simplistic version of Mario Kart, not really leaning enough into the Mario Party elements. The game is split into 3 different game modes: Air Ride, which is basically just the Mario Kart racing; Top Ride, which is a glorified minigame where you just drive around in a circle from a top-down perspective on a few different courses; and the main event, City Trial, which is what the vast majority of this review is going to be spent talking about, because that's like the Mario Party mode, if you can even call it that. Instead of rolling around on a board, you're exploring a mini sandbox, grabbing upgrades, completing mini events, trying to make the best ride possible to win a mini game at the end. Before I go into any of this in detail, let's just talk about the controls. The original was renowned for having a 1-button control system. Yes, just one did everything. And Kirby Air Riders has only added 1 additional button to that control scheme. Now, on the one hand, this makes the game incredibly easy to pick up, because it doesn't take a genius to figure out, oh, you press A to brake, you wiggle the stick to spin and attack people, and you press the Y button to use your character's special skill. That's pretty much everything. There's a few other minor functions you'll use sometimes, but 95% of the time, that's it to the controls. But the downside is when you tie too many functions to the same button, you get the Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 problem, where you accidentally do an action you didn't want to do. I'd say the most common and annoying version of this is when you want to save a one-time use copy ability or some other item that you pick up, but you have to brake to be able to turn, and you end up using most of these items when you let go of the A button, so you better wait until you're in the right position to press A. But back to the game modes, the first game mode, Air Ride, is the one that's most similar to Mario Kart. You pick a character and vehicle of your choice that you've unlocked and race through several different themed courses. I'd say the standout thing about Kirby Air Ride is that each individual ride controls much differently than customizable karts in Mario Kart. Because in Mario Kart, it's typically just top speed, acceleration, handling, and that's pretty much it. All of the basics are the same between each kart. Hell, they've even minimized the standout differences between motorcycles and standard karts in the recent entries. The vehicles in Kirby Air Ride all can control vastly differently from one another. One stops and goes instantly, another can turn on a dime. One of the new vehicles has a really cool concept. The Vampire Star gets better stats when you hit people a bunch of times in a row, but has really low base stats normally. Even the main gimmick ability of rides in Kirby Air Ride, gliding, is something that varies wildly between different vehicles. While the Wing Star can obviously do it the best and actually gets a speed boost while gliding, there's quite a few karts in this game that can't do it at all, like the wheelies, the tanks, and the chariots. There's even a Transform Star, which is another really interesting concept that can transform from a bike to a glider, but is subpar in both of those functions compared to respective vehicles in each class. And the new huge addition, probably the best addition to this game over the first one, is that you can play as other characters than just Kirby. While you could unlock Meta Knight and DDD in the original game, they had very basic mechanics. They couldn't switch rides, so it felt more like you were just picking a different vehicle than actually playing another character. In the sequel, everyone can use copy abilities, and trust me, it's very strange to see a Waddle Dee suck up another Waddle Dee. But whatever, who cares, honestly? What does matter is that these aren't simple skins. Every individual rider has their own stats attached to them. And while you could certainly make the argument that most of those stats just fall into a couple categories, they still differentiate enough that it's worth experimenting around to see which characters you like. Especially because arguably the most important part of each character is their special ability. Now characters have an ultimate of sorts that you build up over the course of a game, and if you don't use it, you lose it. At first I didn't really like this because a lot of times when you get your ability, there's not really a good opportunity to use it immediately in front of you, and you only have like 10 seconds to use it. But when you realize that a lot of people could just use their ability to cheat their way through a mini game or a race or something, if they save it for the right time, it makes a lot of sense why it's done this way. And in the Air Ride mode specifically, for the most part, you'd want to use a lot of these abilities immediately, since over half of the cast basically just has a version of Speed Up. Some of them are massive top speed increases, some of them come with attacks attached to them, others give a huge boost to handling, and there's a couple that even debilitate the other riders. But most of them are basically just some variation of Go Faster, which makes sense when racing is one of the major 3 game modes. Some of these abilities definitely feel a little bit more designed for City Trial, which I appreciate. Like, Kirby has 2 alternate colors that come with the Crash ability, and if you remember Crash from the games, it's a screen clear, so in Air Riders, it's a bomb that you throw directly in front of you. That's obviously useful in a lot of different contexts. In fact, it's still useful in racing, because one of the basic mechanics in this game that is really fun is whenever you deal damage to an enemy or another player, you get a speed boost. That's a great improvement over the first game. But probably my most favorite ability out of all of them, this is not going to surprise you, and I hate to say that Reddit might be right on this one, is Rick's. Because Rick is a fucking hamster who just jumps off the ride and runs around like Sonic. I mean, it's legitimately just the Sonic ability. You run super fast and you hit people. As for the character roster, I've heard a lot of people complain about this, namely that there's way too many minion characters. Like, who the hell wants to play as Cappy or Waddle Dee or Waddle Doo. Of course, there's always going to be contrarians who champion the least popular character, but there's a lot of people who are hoping for Adeline. She's the painter girl from Kirby 64, but notoriously, Sakurai is not the biggest fan of that game because he didn't work on it. Now, me personally, I wouldn't say I have any real complaints, because like I said, I'm not the biggest Kirby fan, even if I have played a lot of the games. I think pretty much anyone I care about is represented here in some fashion. Now, you might expect me to talk about Air Ride or Top Ride in detail, but the truth is, just like the original game, I only care about City Trials, so I'm just going to cover these briefly. Like I said, Air Ride is just racing. The new tracks are actually pretty cool, and I really appreciate that all of the original tracks from the first game are back in this game, and visually look almost identical. It's actually crazy how the visual aesthetic was pretty much maintained one-to-one. And the new tracks do have some fun gimmicks, like being able to ride on top of a train, or having a giant dragon shoot crystals at you. Just cool stuff, even if a lot of times it doesn't really change how the track is played too much. It seems like there's more shortcuts and secret paths, so that's cool, I guess. But this is obviously a mode that I wouldn't spend a lot of time playing outside of just unlocking things, which we'll get into a little bit later, because I really do think Unlockables is such a major component of the appeal of this game, especially in an era where you never unlock anything in games. You have to pay for those things with money, and it has been completely normalized. Moving on to Top Ride, this is just a minigame, a glorified minigame that is its own game mode. You just race in a circle in a top-down perspective, and there are power-ups fucking everywhere that just disrupt the gameplay constantly. In some ways, this game mode feels completely random, and I guess you could say that's part of the appeal of a party game. This has got to be the most casual mode by far. But to me, if someone can just steal first place from you at any second because you accidentally ran into a bomb or a slowdown item that you couldn't even see because it spawned right in front of you, that's not very fun. I guess if I could give it some credit, I'd say it has more gameplay variety than the original game, because in the first, there were only 2 vehicles, which just reflected your control type, and now you can use all of the same rides that are in the other 2 game modes in this mode. So that's kind of cool, I guess, but I can't see any universe where you'd use the formula star for this, because there's so many turns in every track. There's no character special abilities in this game mode either, so you're probably going to get bored of it within an hour. I know I did. And of course, I saved the best for last. This game mode is the only reason that I would recommend this game to anyone. City Trial. To this day, I don't think I've ever played a game mode that quite matches the feeling of City Trial in Kirby Air Ride. Maybe Smash Run on Smash 4 on the 3DS, and, well, Sakurai purposely made that game mode to be similar to City Trial. So, if you remember the experience of what that was like, this is very similar in some ways. Basically, you're dropped in a mini sandbox, and you're given the shittiest ride in the game, the Compact Star, and your goal here is very simple. Over the course of the next 5 minutes, you need to find a better vehicle, break as many blue boxes, pick up various upgrades across the map, participate in events, and if they spawn, grab legendary air ride machine parts to make the best vehicle build possible so that you can win one of the 4 available minigames at the end. It seems pretty simple, but apparently multiple game reviewers didn't even understand the point of City Trial. I guess they're just that retarded, I don't know. Now, I'm going to stop myself here from going into autistic detail because I realize I haven't even really talked about what the appeal of this game mode is. I think it's going to be pretty apparent in this footage. This is definitely an ADHD-coded game where shit is super fast, there's always things going on. Players can kill each other and steal upgrades, which is definitely going to result in a lot of salt. I know it did on my part. Be like, no, he'd be like a... Okay, you fucking fat. And also incredibly satisfying moments if you're the one doing the killing, of course. Revenge! Revenge at the last second! You fucking bitch. match. Even though this is a casual game, it very much is a competition, and a competition at that with multiple ways to win. Like I said, you can either break blue boxes, participate in random events across the map to get upgrades, of which I'd say the events are much better than the first game. Not only do you have returning ones like defeating Dynablade when she shows up on the field, but there's also the Grand Wheelie and Krakow, and even a legendary air ride machine can spawn that you can damage. There's also various just little reward mini games like rings that'll spawn and give you a couple items, or secret rooms will open up, or there's various keys and locked treasure chests that spawn across the map. Everyone's vehicle will be set to 1 health, and if you survive, you get free upgrades. During the event, Tiny Boxes, where, as the name implies, all the boxes become tiny, our favorite dog whistle theme is returned. Tiny boxes, tiny hats? Coincidence? There's mini dust-up derbies and short races as well that you can participate in. You even are given upgrades for arriving to the area early to justify the wasted time you have just sitting there for 10 seconds. And everyone is given a shit ton of upgrades, even if you get a really poor place in the race or the derby. And really what makes this game mode so fun is the sense of progression. When you first get on a ride, it really does control like crap. It's either super slow, can't turn, or can't glide at all. But once you've got 10 upgrades, I mean, you're flying across the map, dude. And that's always fun. Now, of course, what's not fun is a lot of these vehicles control like complete ass with a bunch of upgrades, which I'm going to get into the quote-unquote meta of City Trial a little later. But the chaos of City Trial is something that can't just be explained through words. I mean, it just creates these crazy moments. Like, everyone would be fighting Dynablade, and I would just throw a Gordo on top of everyone and kill like 4 people and steal their upgrades. That's the shit that's fun as hell. Meta aside, there's so many things that kind of derail the experience anyway, like the legendary air ride machine part spawning. You know as soon as someone's getting the Dragoon or the Hydra, they're gonna win the minigame. But even that's not necessarily true. I got the Dragoon and lost a drag race because the Formula Star is just that min-maxed for driving in a straight line. It was crazy because I had like 130 upgrades that game. But if someone gets the Hydra, you know they're winning the versus boss minigame because they just do twice as much damage as everyone else if they're even slightly competent at the game. And there's even 2 new legendary air rides. The Leo, which is a cool lion that you ride around, and it's kind of like a souped up version of the Hop Star. He can jump and smash down on people. And Gigantus, which is probably one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a multiplayer game. You actually get to play as the final boss in the story mode, Road Trip, which I'll talk about a bit later, but let's just say for now I'm not that impressed. But the fact that you get to play as a giant machine that gets to flatten City Trial is cool as hell, and then the minigame becomes the boss fight. And you actually get to fight against 15 other players, or, you know, if someone else gets Gigantus, you get to fight against him. And the day before I recorded this section, I was seething because I missed the perfect opportunity to get Gigantus in a ranked match. And I just choked hard. And then today, I finally got to play as it versus chat. And that is some of the most fun I think I've ever had playing a multiplayer game in my life. That's... Wait, what? Oh my, yes! Chat, I'll make it up to you. I'll make it up to you someday, chat.
Kill him.
Come get me, fuckers! Woo! And the minigame was actually really close because someone in chat managed to get the Hydra, but I still just barely managed to eke out a victory because the Gigantus is clearly overpowered. It is way too hard to kill this thing. But still, that was absolutely fun as hell. And in the game right after, I managed to get the Leo and the Hydra back to back. Now, I will say from the other side of things, it's not nearly as fun because essentially you're given a pool of 20 lives instead of everyone just being given 1, and you have a 2-minute timer to kill the thing. And my team has never won the minigame against Gigantus. Even when we had the Hydra and Leo on our team, we couldn't do enough damage because the guy just boosted around in a circle so he wouldn't die. In some ways, the legendary air ride machines are the best and worst part about City Trial. I think the best part is self-explanatory, but the worst part is that it really just completely derails the sandbox experience because as soon as all the parts are out, people are going to be chasing each other the whole game. game, and sometimes the guy who has 1 or 2 parts is way faster than everyone else, and they're just impossible to catch. And sometimes it's the complete opposite, where the guy with the last part is asleep at the wheel, probably some kid or some 40-year-old who's high as fuck. And so then the guy gets the Hydra and starts dominating the lobby. Actually, the most fun I've had playing ranked mode is getting the Hydra early and killing half of the lobby. Obviously not fun for everyone else, but I had a great time. My favorite online match from this game featured one of my chat members stealing one of the Dragoon parts from me, and I just couldn't get it back for the life of me. It reminds me a lot of the Smash Ball, where you can hit it 5 times, then someone else hits once and suddenly gets the final smash. It is noticeably easier to get a part off someone if you already have one, but you basically have to kill them if you don't. Honestly, very annoying. So I gave up on chasing him down, and then in the last minute of the game, I picked up a giant laser. I flew in midair, aimed it down on him, just absolutely annihilated his ass, but then someone else picked up his part and had 2 parts, and I had the 3rd one, and I chased him down with the Iron Ball power-up, ran him over, got the Dragoon, and then flew off to one of the islands in the top of the map, and got all the upgrades, and then dominated in the minigame. It is moments like that that make multiplayer games memorable, and this is one of those chaotic games. And to briefly touch on the minigames here, this is a pretty wide variety of events, and unlike the first game where it just randomly picked one at the start of the game and you didn't even know what it was unless you got the stadium prediction come up in the middle of the screen, which gives you a hint. This one, most of the time, you get to pick from one of 4, so it doesn't feel like you wasted 5 minutes collecting a bunch of upgrades and selecting a vehicle that would be completely useless. There's a lot of returning games like Destruction Derby, now called Dust Up Derby, where you just destroy as many opponents' vehicles as possible. There's drag races, which are self-explanatory. There are air ride races, which are the courses from Air Ride that you get to drive with super powerful vehicles, which is really fun, actually. And I'm going to resist naming off everyone like I would do in my old videos. Probably the best new minigame is Versus Boss. Technically, it's not new, because you did fight DDD in the OG game, but now you can fight way more bosses, and they're iconic Kirby final bosses from the series like Marks or Nightmare or 02. And yeah, it's pretty cool to fight a boss in a kart racer. You know, that's not something you see every day. And the reason I'm counting this as a new minigame is just because they are actually structured like boss fights. The Versus DDD minigame in the original was just DDD on a big wheelie bike driving in a circle, smacking at you occasionally. These boss fights actually have phases and a bunch of unique attacks and huge health bars, obviously. The only minigames I didn't really like were Gourmet Race, which is ironic because I would win it almost every time. I am the fattest! I'm the fattest. Button Rush and Kirby Melee, and it's just because all of your various upgrades don't really matter that much for these minigames. You just need a vehicle that handles well and know where things spawn. There's also a bit too much of a luck factor to these as well. But I'd say overall the minigame selection is pretty good. At least enough to hold your attention and make the game not feel too repetitive. Okay, now to get into the more autistic notes I have for City Trial mode. To slightly defend game journalists for once, I will say Kirby Air Riders is much more of a clusterfuck than the first game, and that's for one simple reason. City Trial now has 16 players instead of 4. Now, as you would expect, the new map, Skya, is much bigger than the first game's map, probably about twice as large, but I still think 16 players is way too many. It makes some games feel completely random, because you'll drive around the map and just see nothing, because everyone in front of you has already taken all of the upgrades. And even though there's a lot of different ways to get upgrades in this game, I wouldn't say killing other players is very efficient. And if you have less upgrades than the other 15 people in the first place, you're much less likely to earn more upgrades through the events in the sandbox. Someone with more top speed and boost upgrades is going to win the short race. Someone with more attack is going to defeat Dynablade, or at least they're far more likely to than you. But the worst thing that could happen to you is that if out of sheer randomness, or in the case of being a relatively popular streamer, people could target you and destroy your vehicle, and if they destroy you twice over the course of the game, you're fucked. There's no way you can possibly make up for that much lost time and upgrades. Luckily, the 16-player problem is only an issue in quick matches or ranked matches online. If you're in a private lobby or just playing single player versus CPUs, you can completely customize the experience to your liking. You can select the max amount of players, which stadium mini games are active, all sorts of things, which was a really good idea. The only feature I wish was in this set of options was maybe to make certain city trial events more common, because as of the time of recording this, I still haven't gotten the halberd to show up, and I've played City Trial for well over 10 hours at this point. All of that being said, I still think the sandbox is relatively well balanced. I knew that if I got screwed over during City Trial, I still had a very good chance of winning Kirby Melee or Gourmet Race. And that happened multiple times, and that was probably some of the most rewarding moments of this game, was stealing away a victory in the last few seconds with a ride that had no business winning. Now, some of you might be thinking, how could you possibly find this fun if it's completely random? Well, obviously it's not. There are certain elements of skill and knowledge checks to this, namely how the rides control. I don't really want to talk about meta in a party game, but it strikes me that the meta for City Trial is to find a vehicle that controls really well in the early game, whether it's the Wagon Star, the Wheelie Scooter, or the Chariot, and you just use that to drive around the map as efficiently as possible to grab upgrades. And then in the last minute of the game, you quickly find another ride that is much more likely to win a minigame, like the Battle Chariot or the Winged Star, depending on what your build is, of course. Skya has a lot of little randomized elements every game that keep things fresh, which was a great idea because my biggest worry before this game came out was that it would get repetitive really fast. Because you would think if City Trial was the most popular game mode by far, that Sakurai would, I don't know, make 2 or 3 maps. But at least these random elements do affect the gameplay match to match. One of those ways is that there's a cave on the west side of the map, and most of the time either crystals or pillars will spawn that can be destroyed, and those drop upgrades. And if you find a combat item on the field, which there are a lot of, there's like a sweeping laser, there's bombs, there's all these different things, right? You can get down to that spot in the beginning of the match and destroy all of the stuff and get a huge leg up on the rest of the competition. And certain characters actually have a specific advantage for this, because Meta Knight and Knuckle Joe and a couple others actually have a built-in auto attack, and so you can just park right in front of the crystals and destroy them without needing an ability. There's also a bunch of upgrades that spawn on the floating island above the map, so this is definitely to encourage getting one of the flying vehicles early on, the Winged Star being by far the best for this. You can get all those upgrades, and by the late game, you can have enough glide that you can fly to one of the randomly spawning floating islands in the distance on the map, which also have a bunch of free upgrades. So if you know all of this and are fast enough to get to these places, it does reduce some of the randomness. I'd say the other element that definitely requires game knowledge is just knowing the minigame selection and what are the best rides for each minigame. This is where one of my minor issues with the game comes into play. I'd say all of the jack-of-all-trades vehicles are just bad. There's no reason to ever use the generic Warp Star, or the Vampire Star, or the Transform Star. I'd even say the Shadow Star, which is probably my favorite normal vehicle from the original game, is not good enough to win any of the mini-games. If you want a combat vehicle, the Chariot or the War Chariot or one of the tanks is just better for the most part. Even in something like Kirby Melee, you're much better off picking a vehicle that can handle well, like the Swerve Star or the Wheelie Scooter, just so that you can get copy abilities faster and kill more enemies. And so you might be thinking, maybe you could use it to glide. Well, the Shadow Star's glide capability has been significantly nerfed from the first game. It can barely glide at all. With the obvious exception to this point being if you get way more upgrades than everyone else, or you get a really favorable air ride course for the Shadow Star. Despite the air ride mode not being that interesting to me, I think it's by far the best mini game, yet it seems to come up less often than drag races or beam gauntlets or the oval circuit. So yes, I actually have won a couple races with the Shadow Star, but that's not because the Shadow Star is good at racing, it's just I had a lot of upgrades and I know the tracks. That's why the specialized rides are usually the best to win a minigame. I mean, sure, if you have twice as many flight upgrades as someone else, you can probably win Air Glider with the Slick Star, actually, that happened to me. But for the most part, if you want to win, you're going to pick the Winged Star to win Air Glider or High Jump every time, with the obvious exception being if the Dragoon parts spawn. So to get back to the point, it feels like half of the vehicle roster is basically obsolete. I mean, sure, you can argue quite a few of them have a use for just driving around the city trial sandbox, but when it comes to the mini games, it feels like it's the same 5 or 6 vehicles that win every time. And obviously it's completely fine if it's somebody using one of the legendary air ride machines to win, because you actually have to earn those. Well, to a point. There's still a huge RNG factor, as I've already addressed earlier in the video. But you shouldn't constantly be seeing the War Chariot or the Formula Star or the Wing Star winning the majority of mini games. And even that wouldn't be a big deal, except that this game has a ranked mode. I don't think a fucking party game should have a ranked mode. And not just because I think this game should be played purely casually, but also because it splits up the queue system. This has one of the worst matchmaking systems I've ever seen in a multiplayer game. For some reason, Sakurai thought it was a good idea to split the matchmaking not just between the 3 different main game modes, but there's also ranked, quick play, and private lobbies. So we got 9 different ways to play online. Of course, the fucking servers are gonna be dead within a month, especially when City Trial is the only reason why most people play this game. Is there any real reason that Top Ride needed its own quick play and ranked? No, you're just splitting the player base into smaller and smaller pieces. Day 1 of matchmaking, and I'm not joking here, I struggled to get full games of City Trial. That's just 16 players, day 1 of a new game, and I do suspect some of my games had bots, because some of these usernames on these players are really generic. And so I realize what I'm saying right now might be considered to be major negatives against the game, but to me, this is a game meant to be played with your friends anyway. Now, nobody has 15 friends to play a game with, so obviously City Trial is not going to play the same if there's only like 4 to 6 people on the map, considering it's a much larger map than the first games. But I honestly still think this game is fun with bots. I know some people are going to say I'm just coping or lying in some fashion, but genuinely, the reason I think this is fun to play by yourself sometimes is because of the checklist system. I'm going to try not to waste too much time on this because I genuinely believe a lot of modern gamers don't care about unlockables, even though they're a huge part of what made games from 20 years ago better than games now. But Sakurai definitely understands that unlocking things by playing the game and completing challenges is fun. The reason we don't give a fuck about trophies or achievements in video games anymore is because it's just a meaningless score that doesn't matter to anyone. It stopped being novel like a decade ago, and essentially achievements are just used to measure player engagement. Achievements in Masahiro Sakurai games actually unlock new things, whether it's new characters to play as, new vehicles you can test out in certain modes, a bunch of customizable options for your little online credit card thing. You can put a bunch of hats on each of the characters. Hell, you can even customize the vehicles in this game, which is surprisingly robust. People have made a lot of, let's just say, questionable symbols on vehicles. So I think it goes without saying that this game will heavily appeal to completionists. Now, before I end this video, I do want to talk about Road Trip, which I thought had a lot of potential, but the execution was pretty weak. This is essentially classic mode from Smash Bros, but in the format of Kirby Air Ride, which sounds pretty good, actually, but the problem is pretty obvious. It's way too long, and I mean way too long. It's like 3 to 4 hours straight of just doing bite-sized mini-games. I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that's gonna get boring pretty fast. Yes, there is a little bit of story to it, but the story doesn't matter. I mean, basically, some machine dude wishes he could be free, and Galactic Nova gives him a monkey's paw wish and just fucks him over, has a bunch of ants eat him, and build a giant death machine. And the giant death machine calls all the air rides and then gets activated, and then you have to destroy it. The new villain design is extremely lazy, too. It's just an OC Donut Steel version of DDD. Sakurai's starting to go senile. trial. And if you thought doing potentially 4 hours of mini games, getting slightly more powerful over the course of that time was boring enough, you actually have to beat it twice, collecting all the rides over the course of the game mode to unlock the true ending and real final boss fight, which gives you the Leo legendary air ride machine for offline mode. Now, could I elaborate on this game mode another 5 to 10 minutes? Probably, but genuinely, I don't think I'm ever touching this shit ever again. It is more or less exactly what it sounds like. Road Trip just feels way too half-assed. It needed some genuine original content, maybe like Adventure Mode from Melee or Subspace Emissary from Brawl. It almost being a World of Light type of thing, but arguably even worse. Really just sucks and leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and once again leads me to the conclusion that almost all of the resources should have been pumped into City Trial and everything else a distant second in priority. Now, in conclusion, should you buy Kirby Air Riders? Well, if you grew up with Kirby Air Ride and don't have a Switch 2 yet, I still wouldn't buy a Switch 2 just for this game. Is it the first genuinely good Switch 2 game? At least in my opinion, yes. Absolutely, it's good. But it's not a system seller. By the time you get a Switch 2, most of the online matchmaking will be dead and you'll just be playing with bots. Let's be real. I think even after Christmas, when a bunch of kids get the Switch 2, I just don't think they're going to be playing this that much. And I'm not saying this to not recommend the game. Like, I genuinely think it's a great game. It is the most fun I've had playing a game this year, which is incredibly sad. In many ways, it is the perfect sequel that I always ask for, minus a few major things, mainly just that there's only one city trial map. I know Sakurai said there'd be no DLC, but listen, I'm totally down to spend, $20 on more content for this game. I would absolutely do that. I know it would split up the matchmaking even more, so it'd probably have to be a free update, and then something else would have to be the real DLC. But that's fine by me. This is the type of shit I actually want to support because it's good, and I don't want it to die. Unfortunately, I think this will once again be another cult classic game that only a certain small niche group of people are going to talk about how great it is, and no one else will ever give it a chance, and that's fine. My game of the year last year, nobody fucking played that game. It has barely any reviews on Steam. And then that same developer made a Balatro clone and got like 10 times as many players, which is incredibly depressing. So yes, I'm sure people will downplay this game and just be like, it's just random crap where you drive around a map for 5 minutes, then play an irrelevant mini game, and then you just do that over and over again. Sure, you can minimize any game like that. I could say every shooter is, you just click on the guys' heads till you win. Fun is obviously a purely subjective term, and I can definitely see the chaos and randomness of this game putting off a lot of people, but I shouldn't have to remind you guys that video games should not be made for everyone. They should be made for specific niches. A lot of the best games ever made were made for a specific demographic. I don't think there's a problem if you don't like Kirby Air Riders. This is obviously not a game that's going to appeal to most of my audience, but as someone who grew up with the original game, I honestly think this is almost a perfect sequel. It did make a few major mistakes that I think Sakurai just did out of stubbornness because he wanted to make the game his way. But honestly, in this day and age, I really couldn't have asked for a better sequel to one of my childhood favorite games.